Good to have you with us. This is ARIRANG News, live from our studio in Seoul. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. We have lots of stories to get to today. First up, a group of U.S.-based historians say they are not happy about Japan's attempt to whitewash history. They say Tokyo tried to pressure a publisher to change how the issue of Japan's wartime sexual slavery is described in one of its history textbooks. Connie Lee starts us off.
This is a joint statement scheduled to appear in the March edition of the official periodical of the American Historical Association. A copy of the statement, which was sent to Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency, shows 19 American history scholars expressing strong protest against Japan's attempts to suppress statements or water down atrocities in history textbooks, not only in Japan but also elsewhere in the world. The statement is in response to Japan's efforts in recent months to pressure U.S. publisher McGraw-Hill to change how it described its wartime sexual slavery issue in one of its history textbooks. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe claims there are errors in the history book taught in classrooms, with his administration continuing to deny state responsibility for the country's past atrocities. The group of scholars, led by Professor Alexis Dutton from the University of Connecticut, say that no government should have the right to censor history, and they accuse the Abe administration of questioning established history and attempting to eliminate references about the country's sexual enslavement of women during World War II. Historians estimate up to 200,000 women, mostly from Korea, were forced to work in brothels for the Japanese military. As a collective statement on a specific historical issue is seen as highly unusual, analysts are now watching how this will affect Abe's relations with the U.S. and his upcoming visit to Washington sometime this spring. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
American lawmakers are united in slapping more sanctions on North Korea. A bipartisan bill aimed at broadening current sanctions has been introduced and is likely to enjoy support from both Republicans and Democrats. Connie Kim has the details.
U.S. lawmakers are pushing to broaden sanctions on North Korea in the wake of Pyongyang's alleged hack attack on Sony Pictures. U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce said Thursday, a new piece of bipartisan legislation aims to prevent North Korea from accessing the hard currency that supports the regime. The bill would allow U.S. officials to freeze assets held in the U.S. of any individuals or international companies found to be doing business with the North or who have links to the regime's nuclear program. Those who contributed to the massive cyber attack on Sony Pictures last November would also be targeted. The legislation broadens current sanctions on the North, which are focused on U.S. companies and Americans. A similar bill was passed by the House last year and received in the Senate, but later scrapped. The bill's passage is more likely this time as the U.S. has vowed to clamp down on Pyongyang in light of the cyber attack on the Hollywood-based studio. The Senate is also expected to introduce a similar bill. Last month, U.S. President Barack Obama signed an executive order that imposes sanctions against 3 North Korean organizations and 10 individuals. It was the first time the U.S. had sanctioned any country for a cyber attack and implied more sanctions could be on the way, as the U.S. said at the time it was just the first aspect of the U.S. response. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
And there's growing speculation that China has and continues to support North Korea's cyber warfare operations. In an article posted online on the U.S.-based conservative magazine Weekly Standard, Dennis Halpin, a visiting scholar at the U.S.-Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins, suggests that Beijing's computer experts even helped North Korea hack Sony Pictures last November. He said Pyongyang's cyber warfare agency Bureau 121 is based at a hotel in northeast China, close to the border, and North Korea's nearly 2,000-member elite cyber hacking team are actually trained in China. The scholar adds that it seems highly unlikely a major North Korean intelligence operation exists in China without China's knowledge and approval. And North Korea's total grain production last year reached its highest level since the beginning of the regime's economic collapse in the mid-1990s. According to the United Nations World Food Program and Food and Agriculture Organization, North Korea's total grain production, which includes rice, corn, and beans, amounted to nearly 5 million tons in 2014. That's 130,000 tons more than its total production the year before. Now, data shows that the regime's food production has been gradually increasing ever since leader Kim Jong-un came into power in 2011. But North Korea is still short on the grain needed to maintain the bare minimum necessary for its people due to decreased international aid and losses in productivity from floods and famine. North Korea remains a tough country to invest in because it's extremely hard to predict what will happen in the reclusive state. But the regime continues to seek much-needed foreign investment. ARIRANG News Hwang Sung-hee takes a look at how the world's most closed economy is trying to make money.
Its constant military provocations, threats, and dangerous brinkmanship over its nuclear program make North Korea the least attractive place for business. But some say the regime is opening up to draw much-needed foreign investment, for example, in tourism.
There is now a growing trade in tourism from the Netherlands to North Korea. So the North Korean government is now inviting Dutch students to go to Pyongyang to give Dutch language training to the North Korean tour guides.
Around 100,000 tourists visit this untrodden corner of the world every year, and North Korea says it aims to raise that number to 1 million. For that, it has set up opulent new ventures like the Masikryang ski resort. Korea Tours, a Western travel agency that organizes trips to the north, says the regime is enthusiastic about its program proposals most of the time.
A lot of projects that we've been working on that have become possible in the last 3 years or so are things we were working on beforehand.
But North Korea's unpredictability is troubling. The regime banned tourists last October on Ebola fears, with no signs of lifting it anytime soon. In fact, North Korea was placed at the very bottom of the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, with a score of 1.3 points out of 100. That's over 70 points behind South Korea and nearly 30 points below Cuba, which came second to last on the list.
So it doesn't provide any meaningful consistency in terms of policy. And also North Korea remains, many factors in North Korea are unknown. So I think that's the key risky factor for the investors.
Experts say North Korea's handling of the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex, with its frequent changes in regulations and unilateral shutdowns, is a good example of its uncertainty. Despite the problem, trade between the two countries hit a record $2.3 billion last year, thanks to growing output in the joint business park. Given the lack of resources and capital, experts say Pyongyang must open up and reform its antiquated economic system.
That's the only way to improve the daily lives of North Koreans.
But first, North Korea will have to end its confrontation with the outside world over its nuclear program. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
Top diplomats from South Korea, Japan, and China are expected to meet next month in what will be their first such trilateral meeting in 3 years. A senior official at Seoul's foreign ministry says the three countries are discussing the possibility of holding minister-level talks in Seoul at the end of March. Now, this is noteworthy as the country's annual high-level diplomatic exchanges had been hampered by territorial issues and Japan's denials of its historical wrongdoing. Pundits say the upcoming meeting could also serve as an opportunity for separate bilateral talks on other pending issues among the three ministers. The 5 years following 2016 will be crucial in addressing the problems associated with Korea's rapidly aging population. That's what President Park Geun-hye said today. Let's have a listen first.
지금 우리가 제대로 대응을 해야만 위기를 기회로 바꿔서 지속 가능한 성장 동력을 창출할 수가 있습니다. 올해 3차 기본 계획을 잘 만드는 것이 앞으로 5년 더 나아가 우리나라의 50년의 미래를 결정짓는다는 각오로.
Now, her remarks were made today during a meeting with related officials. In order to really overcome the nation's chronically low birth rate, the president says women need to be given more support to continue working even after giving birth. She also said issues such as youth unemployment, childcare, and housing costs need to be tackled. Now, through policies drawn up this year, the Park administration aims to bring up Korea's birth rate from 1.1 in 2013 to 1.4 by the year 2020. The debate over tax versus welfare is heating up the political front in Korea. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan says he is against raising taxes at the moment because it will fuel deflationary pressure on the economy. Our Hwang Ji-hye explains.
Now is not the time to talk about a tax hike. That's what Korean Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan said on Thursday at the National Assembly. He said raising taxes will lead to shrinking domestic demand under the current economic conditions, stoking concerns over deflation risks. Choi added, however, that if a tax increase was to happen, it could only be through public consensus. The minister is sticking with President Park Geun-hye's campaign pledge to provide more welfare while keeping tax revenues fixed. And to do so, the government pledged Thursday to make its financial structure more efficient by cutting out overlapping welfare programs and raising transparency in local finances. The finance ministry said it will first merge or discard 600 redundant welfare programs. The move to streamline finances looks inevitable as Korea is expected to post a tax deficit for the fourth straight year in 2015. This amid calls for broader welfare in a country that has one of the fastest aging population with low birth rates. The finance ministry estimates last year's revenue shortfall will stand at over 11 trillion won or roughly $10 billion. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
The chairman of Hyundai Motor Group and his son have sold around 13% of their stake in the group's logistics unit. Analysts speculate the move was made to raise cash for the son and heir apparent, allowing him to purchase shares in key units and solidify control over the firm. Kim Min-ji has more.
The chairman and vice chairman of Hyundai Motor Group have offloaded some of their stakes in the group's logistics affiliate, landing them some $1 billion in cash. Chairman Jung Mong-gu and his only son and deputy Eui-sun sold over 5 million shares in Hyundai Glovis, or 13.4% of equity in a block deal, according to industry officials on Friday. The price per share stood at around $210, 2.7% lower than the previous day's close. It's also down about $45 from what the family initially offered at their first attempt last month, which failed due to disagreement over sales terms. The sale comes as Hyundai Glovis has to meet a revised antitrust law on intra-group transactions. The law, which takes effect this month, calls for up to 3 years in jail for controlling shareholders owning a stake of 30% or more if they carry out intra-group transactions that benefit them. Now, with the stock sales sealed, the combined stakes held by the chairman and his son dropped to 29.99%. Analysts also see the move as an attempt to raise cash for the son and heir apparent, needed to increase his control in the automotive group by purchasing shares in key units. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Foreigners coming to Korea for medical services are spending less than they used to. The Bank of Korea says spending by foreign patients visiting Korea for medical services dropped by $25 million or 6.5% last year from the year 2013. It's the first decline since the central bank began collecting data in 2006, raising concerns that Korea's medical tourism industry is slowing down. The drop in spending is attributed to a weak weaker Russian ruble that's kept Russian patients from spending money here. But the medical community is hopeful that the spending will pick up as the number of foreign patients from the Middle East is growing. And speaking of the ruble, Russia's inflation rate hits its highest level in 16 years last month because of the falling ruble. Russia's statistics service Rosstat says January's inflation rate amounted to 3.9% compared to 2.6% a month before. Now, this is the highest pace of inflation in Russia since February 1999, when consumer prices grew by over 4% in 1 month. January's rate was also considerably higher than Rosstat's forecast of 2.7% and economists' outlook of 2.6%. The figures come just days after the country's central bank cut its main interest rate from 17% to 15%, citing stabilizing inflation. Now, the clock is ticking for the South Korean military to replace its aging fleet of fighter jets, which have already reached or even gone over their lifespan. It's no news that Korea plans not to import but replace the old jets with homegrown ones. Kim Hyun-bin has the latest on how that plan is moving forward.
The Korea fighter jet program aims to develop 4.5 generation fighter jets to fill in the gap with more advanced technology, as a batch of Korean fighters are set to be retired in the coming years.
South Korea's Air Force has around 400 jets in service, but roughly half of them are antiquated jets, such as the F-4 and F-5. These days, 4th and 5th generation fighters are the mainstay globally, but Korea is lagging behind with mostly 3rd generation jets.
Korea has set aside roughly $17 billion for a project to develop and mass-produce 124.5 generation fighter jets that will replace the Air Force's old F-4s and F-5s. The KF-X jets are scheduled to be integrated into the Air Force in 2025. On top of that, Korea recently signed a roughly $7 billion deal with Lockheed Martin for 45th generation F-35 stealth fighters, though there are some concerns. Some experts worry that a delay could push Korea's already old fighter jet fleet to the limit. South Korea's defense ministry says it's looking into other options, such as enhancing the performance of the current KF-16 fleet and tanker aircraft to fill in temporarily. The KF-X, however, will not be Korea's first homegrown fighter jet. The F-A-50, which finished development in 2011, was integrated into the Air Force last October. That jet has already caught the eye of international buyers. Korea has exported more than 50 of them to Iraq, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Seoul also plans to sell 24 F-A-50s to Peru this year in a deal worth some $2 billion. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Jordan is following through with its pledge to take revenge on the Islamic State militant group. It launched waves of airstrikes on some of the group's key positions in Syria on Thursday, and Jordan says there's much more to come. Kwon So-ah reports.
This is just the beginning, is what Jordan's military vowed after launching its first airstrikes against Islamic State since the extremists released a video this week showing Jordanian pilot Muath al-Qasasbeh being burned alive in a cage. Jordan's army expressed its will on state television to take revenge on the militant group, showing footage of dozens of warplanes bombing what appeared to be munitions bases and training camps in northern Syria.
Tens of Royal Jordanian Air Force aircraft launched consecutive airstrikes to demolish strongholds and holes of the terror organization Islamic State.
Iraqi media reports more than 50 IS militants were killed, including a senior commander. After the raid, the fighter jets flew over the hometown of the deceased pilot as Jordan's King Abdullah was visiting the pilot's grieving family. Qasasbeh's father, a key member of a powerful tribe in Jordan, reportedly said he got King Abdullah's word that his son's death would be avenged. On the day the gruesome execution video was released, he said the Jordanian government must take action. Jordan has already shown its fury by executing 2 Iraqi militants connected with IS, including the woman Jordan demanded in exchange for Kazaspe's release. Jordan's airstrikes were the first since the pilot's capture in December brought them to a halt. Jordan is part of the U.S.-led coalition against Islamic State, but there's still a political divide within the country as to how much Jordan should be involved in this fight. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
The leaders of Germany and France are working together to ease tensions in eastern Ukraine, where the fighting between rebels and Russia-backed separatists is still happening. After making a surprise trip to Kiev, the two plan to visit Moscow with a peace proposal. For this report, here's our Son Jung-in.
The leaders of Germany and France have proposed a new peace initiative for Ukraine, raising hopes of a breakthrough in the year-old conflict pitting Kiev against separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine. Angela Merkel and François Hollande said they have worked together to draft a proposal based on Ukraine's territorial integrity and hope it will be acceptable to both sides in the conflict. The high-level diplomatic maneuver is seen as an apparent bid to head off U.S. consideration of lethal military aid for the Ukrainian government in its war against the Russian-backed separatists. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who had arrived in Kiev earlier, met with Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and other top officials to affirm U.S. support for a diplomatic resolution to the conflict. Kerry also urged Moscow to show its commitment to a peaceful solution and to cease its military support for the separatists, an allegation that Russia strongly denies. Fierce fighting has flared again in the region in recent weeks, with rebels advancing on a railway hub held by Ukrainian troops after launching an offensive that scuppered a 5-month-old ceasefire. According to the United Nations, the fighting has claimed more than 5,000 lives since April last year, including some 220 civilians killed in just the past 3 weeks. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
Happy Friday, everyone. I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Although we began the morning with freezing temperatures, the daytime temperatures have risen very quickly, warming up the afternoon. However, strong winds continue to blow across the country, so make sure to dress warm so that you don't catch a cold on the weekend. Now, we also have high levels of fine dust here in the central region and parts of Gangwon province. So visibility levels are on the low side, and in other parts of the country, clear skies are expected. Now let's have a look at the weather for the weekend. Saturday is going to be a nice day with sunny skies, although there will be sporadic showers in some regions. But Sunday is going to be freezing cold once again, so make sure to plan your weekend accordingly. Now let's take a look at the readings for today. So we'll peak up to 6 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will reach up to 8 and 10 degrees. Moving over to other regions, Jeju Island will get up to 9, Dokdo hits down to 6, while Mangungan can expect sunny skies at -1 degrees. Well, that's all for now, Michelle Park, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that does it for this edition of our newscast. From me and the rest of the team in Seoul, thank you very much for staying with us. We'll be back with more updates at 6 p.m. Korea time.